Hello everyone. In today's Cretaceous profile we're doing is of a nodosaur from the early Cretaceous in North America. And that is the most well understood nodosaur. Meet Sauropelta is a genus of nodosaurid dinosaur that existed in the early Cretaceous period in North America. It is one of the most well understood nodosaurids, with fossilized remains recovered in the U.S., in Wyoming, Montana, and possibly even in Utah. It is also the earliest known genus of nodosaurine. Most of its remains are found in a section of Cleveland Clovery Formation. It lived in early Cretaceous of about 108.5 million years ago. And it is a medium-sized nodosaurid. Was heavily built quadrupedal herbivore, measuring about 5.2 and 6 meters, 17.1 to 19.7 feet long, and body mass of about 1.5 to 2 tons. The skull was triangular when viewed from above, with the rear end wider than the tapering snout. One of the skulls measured 35 centimeters, 13.75 inches, in width and the widest point behind the eyes. Unlike some other nodosaurids, the roof of the skull was characteristically flat, not domed. The roof of the skull was very thick and covered in flat, bony plates that are so tightly fused that there appear to be no stellar boundaries, like ones seen in Pinoplosaurus, Pawpasaurus, and Silverosaurus, and many other ankylosaurs. This could also be an artifact of preservation or preparation, as in other ankylosaurs with thick triangular scutes projected from the postabiter bone above and behind the eyes, as well as the jugal bone below and behind the eyes. More typically for nodosaurids, leaf-shaped teeth lined both upper and lower jaws, used for cutting plant material. The front end of the skull is unknown, but there would have been a sharp bony ridge at the end of the upper and lower jaws. As seen in other ankylosaurs, this ridge probably have supported a keratinous beak. It had a distinctively long tail, which made up of half of its body length, although its body was small than modern black rhinoceroses. Sauropelta and made up nearly half of the body length. One skeleton preserved was 40 cervical vertebrae, although some were missing, suggesting that true number of cervical vertebrae may have been exceeded 50. Ossified tendons stiffed the tail along its length, like other ankylosaurs. Sauropelta had a wide body with a very broad pelvis and rib cage. The forelimbs were shorter than the hind limbs, which resulted in the arch back, with the highest point over the hips. Its feet, limbs, shoulder, and pelvis were all shortly constructed and reinforced to support great deal of weight. Like other nodosaurids, Sauropelta was covered in armor formed from the body masses embedded in the skin. The discovery of the skeleton, with the body armor preserved, allowed Carpenter and the other scientists to accurately describe this protection. Two parallel rows of domed scutes run down the top of the neck along the front and the back. On the upper surface of the back and tail, skin was covered in small bony notables, which separated the larger conical scutes arranged in parallel rows along the side to side. Over the hips, the, the ossicle and larger domed plates were interlocked very tightly to the form of structure called sacral shield. This shield is also found in ankylosaurs like Polycanthus and Sauropelta. Large pointed spines lined up the sides of the neck, increasing in size towards the shoulders, and then decreasing in size again along the sides of the body until they stopped just to the hip. Behind the hips, flat triangular plates lined the tail on both sides, pointing laterally outwards and decreasing in size towards the end of the tail. Originally described in the cervical neck spines and in the caudal plates as belonging to the single row on each side, although more recently he and Jim reconstructed them to parallel rows on each side, one above the other. The upper row's cervical spines protected the backwards and upwards, while the lower row pointed backwards and outwards. The bases of each pair of cervical spines and each pair of caudal plates were fused together, greatly restricting mobility in both the neck and upper tail. And for the classification, Sauropelta is recognized as a member of the family Nodosauridae. The nodosaurids, along with the family Ankylosauridae, belonged within the infraorder Ankylosauria. Nodosaurids are characterized by certain features, the skull including the mandible, which curves downwards at the end, Overall, nodosaurids had lower, narrower snouts than icalosaurids, and also lacked heavily a heavily icalosaurid clubtail. Nodosaurids, like icalosaurs, are found in North America, Asia, and Europe. In the early 1930s, famed dinosaur hunter and paleontologist Birmingham Brown collected a holotype specimen of Sauropelta, AMNH 3032, a partial skeleton from the Clovery Formation in Bighorn County, Montana. The locality is inside the Crow Indian Reservation. Brown also discovered two other specimens, AMNH 3035 and 3036. The latter is one of the best preserved nodosaurid skeletons known to science. Includes a large amount of armor, and it is on display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. A ANMNH 3035 preserves the cervical armor, and most of the skull is missing. Only the end of the snout. Expedition in the 1960s, led by equally renowned John Ostrom of Yale University's Peabody Museum of Natural History, recovered additional incomplete specimens from the Clovery. In 1970, Ostrom coined the genus Sauropelta, meaning its name means lizard shield. Despite naming of Sauropelta 2 years earlier, confusion arose in 1972 when the name Peltosaurus was inadvertently published as the caption of the photograph of ANMNH 3036, although Brown never published a name or description for the remains, which are now known as Sauropelta. In 1999, Carpenter and colleagues described a material large nodosaurid from Utah, discovered in a member of the Cedar Mountain Formation, called the Poison Strip Sandstone, which is comparatives with the Clovery Formation. He initially referred to it as Sauropelta as a possible new species, but here's the thing. It was never named. In more recent publication, Carpenter no longer referred to the poison strip animal to Sauropelta, only to the family Nodosauridae. Other recent but undescribed discoveries include a large skull from the Clovery Formation of Montana and a huge fragmentary skeleton from Cedar Mountain Formation of Utah. These discoveries have been published only as abstracts. For the annual Society of Vertebrate Paleontology Conference and may or may not prove to belong to Sauropelta itself. And there has been footprints discovered in 1932, reported presence of footprints of a large four-footed dinosaur from the lower Cretaceous rocks in British Columbia, Canada. He discovered he discovered the gene genus and species for the tracks Tetraposaurus and attribute them to ceratopsians. However, in 1984, paleontologist Kenneth Carpenter re-examined the British Columbian Tetraposaurus prints and argued that they were made by an ankylosaur rather than ceratopsians. Specifically, he concluded that these were probably footprints of Sauropelta. 5 years later, large number of tracks were discovered at the Smoky River coal mine near the Grande Carche in Alberta. This site is considered the most important ankylosaur track site in the world. Most people don't know that. It was one of the earliest nodosaurids. All specimens of Sauropelta were recovered from the Little Sheep Mudstone section of the Clovery Formation in Wyoming and Montana, which has been dated to 108.5 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. Sauropelta lived in wide floodplains around rivers and drained into the shallow inland sea to the north and east, carrying sediment erode from the low mountains of the west. Periodic flooding of these rivers covered the surrounding plains with new muddy sediments, creating the Clovery Formation and burying remains of many animals, some of which were fossilized at the end of the Clovery times. The shallow sea would expand to cover the entire region, and it would eventually split North America completely in half, forming what is now known as the Western Interior Seaway. Abundant fossil remains of coniferous trees suggest that these plains were covered in forests. Grasses would not evolve until later in the Cretaceous. So Sauropelta and the other early Cretaceous dinosaurian herbivores browsed a variety of conifers and cycads. Nodosaurids like Sauropelta had a narrow snout, an adaptation seen today in animals that are selective browsers, as opposed to other wide muzzles of grazers. While Sauropelta was an important part of the Clovery herbivore guild, the most abundant herbivorous dinosaurs of the time that lived alongside it, and they are Tyrannosaurus, Saurosaurus, and a rare titanosaur sauropod, and an unknown type of ornithomimosaur also lived alongside Sauropelta. But it will have to watch out for predators like Donicus fed upon some of these herbivores, and the sheer number of Deinonychus teeth scattered throughout the formation are a testament of its abundance. And a small basal oviraptorosaur, Microvenator, hunted smaller prey. But you have to watch out for an apex predator in the early Cretaceous, and that is the Cretaceous Acrocanthosaurus itself. But it won't have to worry because it had a tail with rows of spikes from side to side and shoulder to protect it from. Although Archaeopteryx's teeth are not designed to even shear the flesh of a nodosaur, it would have to flip it over, but it would have to watch out for its tail and the sides of its shoulders and the head. And there are other animals that live alongside it: lungfish, mammals, and several species of turtles that lived in that formation. Wild crocodilians prowl the rivers, lakes, and swamps, providing evidence of year-round warm climate. The late Jurassic fauna dominated by allosaurids, stegosaurs, and many variety of huge sauropods gave way by Cloverate times to the early Cretaceous fauna, in which dromaeosaurids, ornithopods, and odontosaurids like Sauropelta itself were predominant after the Cloverate ended. A large wave of Asian animals, including tyrannosaurids, ceratopsians, and ankylosaurids, would diversify into western North America, forming a mix of fauna seen throughout the late Cretaceous. And that's it for this video. Like and subscribe, and see you later, guys.